I am going to be talking about broad themes and concepts. It was my impression that that's what a keynote speaker should do. So I want you to know that I'm looking forward to hearing more about the operational work and the advances that you are making in your own research. I'm very excited to hear from you. And my goal in the next few minutes is going to be to place things into a broader political, historical, and social context for us all to think about in placing our research. So it's now commonplace to say that the character of war is changing, but that war's nature is not. And a corollary to that would be that technology is changing the character of terrorism, but not terrorism's nature. Terrorism remains a political act. Frontline technology creates new terrorism risks. Yet the danger is not simply what terrorists do with emerging technologies, but whether governments and big tech companies respond in ways that undermine legitimacy, freedom, and human judgment. Terrorism is old. It long predates the Western nation, the modern nation state, reaching back at least to the 4th century and probably much earlier. Counterterrorism, on the other hand, is young. It emerged as a distinct state practice in the 19th century with the establishment of the Special Irish Branch of the London Metropolitan Police, the International Conference of Rome in Europe, and Imperial Japan's policing of anarchists and Korean nationalists shortly thereafter. The core of the entire terrorism enterprise has always been about humans targeting humans. But now, because of new and emerging technologies, that's changing. In recent years, terrorism has become increasingly automated in both the attack side and the defense side. Broad categories of democratized digital technology, such as social media, automated online bots, and various forms of artificial intelligence and machine learning have altered both terrorism and counterterrorism by undermining common norms and values, making rules of the game hazy, and most important of all, shifting key judgments from the human to the machine. But I think we can't seriously assess terrorism and technology without first considering, as I mentioned earlier, the broader global setting in which we live. Before digging into the details, I'm going to mention some crucial factors that I think we need to keep in mind about that context. First, global technological power and trailblazing tech innovation are heavily concentrated. Terrorist groups and other violent non-state actors will never be tech pioneers. They will not build their own massive databases or acquire sufficient compute to be at the cutting edge of terrorism and counterterrorism or technology. Their creativity will be on the margins, opportunistic, time-lagged, and the impact of violent non-state actor innovation will be political rather than technological. But if global technological power is concentrated, then terrorism's power is unconcentrated. The AI-driven fractionation of the internet today really helps explain why terrorism has moved beyond categories of left-wing, right-wing, ethno-nationalist, and spiritualist groups into weird grievance-driven clusters like incels, nihilists, and accelerationists, right-wing militias, white supremacists, and lone wolves. The list can go on and on. And by the way, none of the ones that I just mentioned are included in the recently published US counterterrorism strategy. And there are burgeoning tech-facilitated intersections between terrorism and school shootings, cults, and cybercrime, plus anti-tech terrorism. For many perpetrators, there's no coherent ideology, just grievance and anger. In the past quarter century, the nature of global actors has also shifted. Like the late 19th century, when counterterrorism was born, today, private companies play a key role in both driving commercial innovation and setting the conditions for terrorist attacks. Tech companies are major international actors with wealth and resources comparable to nation states. And as was the case in the late 19th century, terrorism is a three-way phenomenon of violent non-state actors, commercial companies, and governments. But at the same time, there are parallels between nihilists and the 19th century anarchists, as both felt powerless and wanted to destroy the social order. But the titans of the 19th century were building railroads, steel plants, dynamite, oil wells, and financial trusts, not trying to shape human cognition and the future of knowledge. I think that's both more thrilling and also sometimes more threatening. Finally, a word about our geopolitical context. The competition with China looms large over every conversation about terrorism and technology. Many argue that any serious regulation of technology will slow down innovation and yield the so-called AI race to China. I believe that's the wrong way to think about it. Nefarious use of cutting-edge innovations will backfire against both major tech companies and Western nation states, but not likely against China. Serious guardrails can make technological innovation faster, better, and more stable to reduce risks and build the kind of world we all want to see. But let me return again to my current and central thesis for today about technology and terrorism, which was the topic I was given. The most urgent technological question today is not whether future terrorist attacks will use democratized technologies like bots, deep fakes, and drones, etc. They will. What worries me more is whether commercial companies will mitigate the terrorism risks of technological innovations that are still emerging, and whether governments will employ counterterrorism technologies wisely, treating terrorism as an interactive, human-centered threat. In what follows, I'll cover those three areas. That's the downstream tech threat today, the upstream tech threat that's still emerging, and the challenge of finding wisdom in counterterrorism and technology. So let's begin by talking about the downstream democratized technologies that terrorist groups are already using today. And that was the subject of my last book. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but I'll give you a certain overview that at least I see. The salient terrorism question is not who invents technology first. Terrorists seldom do. The key question is how quickly powerful tools diffuse into the hands of malign, opportunistic, non-state actors. Today, most technology spreads via commercial processes. Individuals and private groups are free to buy, use, and distribute these technologies, to invent new purposes for them, new forms of them, new surprise combinations of them, meaning open, low-end technologies are causing broader changes in both state and non-state violence. Being opportunistic, terrorists use technology that has diffused and is accessible to them. As I wrote in my last book, Power to the People, that diffusion process is foreseeable. Today, we're experiencing the diffusion and democratization of tools that are accessible, cheap, simple to use, transportable, and part of a cluster of other emerging technologies. They're not cutting edge, not in the first wave of innovation, but in the second or third wave of technological development. We all use them, and other violent non-state actors do too. Many forms of artificial intelligence and machine learning are common dual-use technologies. AI is both inspiring attacks and facilitating them in foreseeable downstream ways that we've been experiencing for about a decade. We can track incidents, monitor threats, and observe broad global patterns as a result. I see terrorist advances now in 5 broad functional areas. I'm looking forward to hearing more from you. These are mainly functional themes. The first is mobilization, which is very well established. It's not new at all. In 2014, ISIS was the trailblazer in using digitally mobilized support, and it continues to inspire violence. It's easy to find potential recruits in data mining and micro-targeting, and then draw them into encrypted platforms such as Telegram and Discord. As a result, perpetrators frequently self-radicalized, and they're getting ever younger, often in their teens. Through online training, they gain firearms and explosives training. And individuals can even find specific operational advice, as ChatGPT recently gave shooters at Florida State University and Tumblr's Ridge, Canada. Mobilization is the first broad theme, and we've seen this coming for at least 12 years and much more, actually. Secondly is information operations. Propaganda videos are easy to produce and edit using voice cloning, deepfakes, and computer simulated events. Messages go viral when they're amplified by bots. Bots also automate the creation of thousands of online profiles and posts, and groups very easily publicize attacks through Telegram or other channels, perpetuating the cycle of violence. So the Houthis are particularly good at this, information ops, and so is Al-Shabaab. Third is reconnaissance, or ISR. Groups are using camera-toting quadcopters, Google Earth, all the other accessible tools of navigation and information that we all use. Some consult Gen AI chatbots like IS does to plan operations. Reconnaissance is much easier for all of them as it is for all of us. That's again not new. Remember, Lashkar-e-Taiba used Google Earth throughout the 2008 Mumbai attacks, almost 20 years ago. But there is a step change in the sophistication of those tools now. Fourth is resourcing or terrorist financing. Cryptocurrency makes it very easy to evade legal controls on terrorist financing. I was in the Congressional Research Service in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, and I remember when a lot of the terrorist financing legislation was being created and put into place in the United States. It's a very different world now. Groups also use online crowdfunding platforms to raise funds. The best fundraisers are probably Hamas, Hezbollah, plus individuals like the 2019 Christchurch attacker who funded his operation with cryptocurrency. And then finally, of these broad themes is power projection or reach. Many terrorist groups have power projection capabilities that are similar to small states. Simple explosive-laden drone attacks are very common. ISIS again in 2016, Hamas and Hezbollah. Commercial off-the-shelf drones are emerging by the Islamic State, Hamas, the Houthis, but there's also the spread of fixed-wing drones, tech that was shared by the Iranians to the Houthis, Hezbollah, and now those groups have learned to make their own. And state-sponsored groups use semi-autonomous drones or remote targeted drones, as we've seen in the Strait of Hormuz. So 5 big themes, much more to talk about there that I'm really looking forward to hearing from you about. I think the predictable next tech evolutions for terrorist groups are fairly easy to imagine and foresee. Fiber optic connected drones to evade electronic jamming, as has been demonstrated in Ukraine. Facial recognition technology for easy targeting, it's already been widely used. And various applications and types of artificial intelligence and machine learning will be the pathway into other technologies in the next 10 years, including embodied AI, of course, robotics, AI-driven robotics. At Carnegie Mellon, we make a lot of AI, physical AI, embodied AI, and fully autonomous systems, including drone swarms and loitering munitions. They're already experimenting with AI-driven navigation modules, automated targeting that will spread to groups like the Houthis and the Islamic State. And the next step after that will be AI agents, independent acting software that can autonomously set goals, make decisions, and act on them in the second or third wave. So think about where we are now in the first wave, and then look down the road. And then recursive self-improvement of those agents through deep learning will be next. Of course, none of this is good, but also none of this is that surprising. We've seen most of it coming for at least a decade, as I've mentioned. And we can project similar pathways for the next decade. Many of these AI ML tools are integrated into our everyday lives. If individuals, consumers can use them, so can non-state groups, including terrorists, because they're consumers too. The trends are clear, but at this point, solutions are piecemeal and reactive. They include counter messaging, taking down websites, prosecuting contributors, using AI tools to identify patterns, controlling supply chains, supporting local counterterrorism efforts, and collaborating on intelligence and warning. All extraordinarily important. Without foresightful measures, though, it's a bit like trying to uninvent dynamite, or the AR-15, or the Kalashnikov. In terrorism, the ability to diffuse technology, again, is more important than the ability to innovate. Diffusion is easier for us to foresee and identify, but it's also very difficult to control, especially if there are not measures put in place beforehand. But from the perspective of technology and terrorism, the threat is now a matter of compared to what? So let's move upstream to newer cutting-edge technologies that have not yet diffused. I see two crucial attack vectors where wise intervention now can still make important differences to the future of the threat of malicious use. The first is automated large-scale cyber attacks. If you've been reading the press, or if you know anything about what's happening with frontier models, you will have heard about Anthropic's Mythos and the future versions. These are powerful, self-improving models that can autonomously identify cyber vulnerabilities and third-party entry points, such as routine vendor software updates. They can operate at large scale and are a new paradigm for potentially leveraging the power of malicious actors, both state and non-state. Wide-scale attacks on infrastructure are a huge worry. And my program, the Institute for Strategy and Technology, has published a number of publications about infrastructure attacks and the intersection between those and cyber terrorism and terrorism. In any case, attacks against infrastructure are an enormous worry, but also banks, government agencies, and military organizations. Anthropic's reaction and restriction of access to Mythos through Project Glasswing was a wise security measure to give defenders a head start. And OpenAI is doing the same with GPT 5.4 Cyber and GPT 5.5 Cyber. Some are a little bit cynical and say that this is just fear marketing, but honestly, I don't really care what it is as long as the outcome is the same. These are wise measures. Will other major tech companies take a cautious approach? Not to mention China? Or will this be the next technological juggernaut that gives unprecedented power to malicious actors? We need to put guardrails and cooperative measures in place now, ahead of the curve. The second big area that I'll address, and I've done a considerable amount of writing on this, is biotechnology. But I think the biggest future threat actually will be bioterrorism. This is, it would really require a presentation in itself, so I'm going to cover a lot of things pretty quickly, but I think it's a very important element of technology and terrorism. Today, it's very easy to read, write, alter, and share genetic code. So advances in biology are more like the invention of the printing press, far more momentous than anything that happened at the end of the 19th century, frankly. Today, addressing biosecurity requires expertise in chemistry, engineering, computer science, data analysis, robotics, artificial intelligence, and cloud computing. It's an unprecedentedly complicated interdisciplinary science. Scientists used to insist that self-regulation of biotechnology advances was enough, that external regulation would choke off innovation, that experts in the field knew best. Well, I'm not even sure how to define the field anymore. It's not just biology, as I said, it's engineering, computer science, material science, mathematics at a minimum. This is not just a network of known and trusted fellow colleagues. There are numerous ways that technology is changing biosecurity. LLMs are handy general tools for explaining processes, summarizing a wide range of scientific literature, even offering suggestions for how to create new biological threats or manufacture old ones like smallpox. In addition to LLMs, we have sophisticated biological design tools, which are AI software products that are trained specifically on biological data. The combination of LLMs and biological tools is a new software risk. But we also have to think about hardware when it comes to biosecurity. This includes robotic facilities, especially self-driving labs, which are autonomous labs that combine AI, robotics, and automated experimentation, usually used by experts, and then cloud labs, which are more broadly available remotely to non-experts. Given the widespread ability to create new molecules or alter existing bacteria and viruses, the concept of proliferation is badly outdated. Because going forward, we won't even know what agents or living organisms to track. Bioterrorism with known agents is a problem, and that won't go away, but there will also be novel risks from accidents, trained insiders, unethical tinkerers, weaker states or non-state actors who could not otherwise afford advanced scientific labs of their own. And there are very impressive new autonomous agents being developed that can actually design, plan, perform experiments, and write code for complex instructions that the user might not otherwise know how to do. So just last week, Google officially rolled out Co-Scientist. It's been around for a while, but now it's official. It's a multi-agent AI system that helps researchers generate new hypotheses and put together research plans for testing them. This is extremely exciting for potentially solving medical problems, such as ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, liver disease, even possibly reversing human aging, although I'm a little skeptical on that one. 99% of this is extremely exciting and must be pursued and supported. But terrorism is a game of the percentages, leveraged power at the edges in the aftermath of major new advances. It could revolutionize medicine and save millions of lives, but if we don't consciously face and offset the negative risks, we're going to be in trouble very quickly. LLMs are giving advice about how to build bioweapons, for example. In drug development, if you can optimize for non-toxicity, which is what one would do, you can also optimize for toxicity. Of course, a significant level of expertise is needed to actually build something. I'm not trying to be superficial here. I understand what it is to be in a wet lab and how different that is from being able to do something on the internet and use these tools in their digital form. But LLMs can also walk people interactively through a process of learning. What I'm trying to say is that the so-called threshold for uplift is getting lower. So in this regard, it's very important to mention that scientists and engineers are overrepresented in terrorist groups, especially organized jihadist groups, as you'll know if you've read Diego Gambetta's book. Building a sophisticated bioweapon is not something that any terrorist group could carry out, but state sponsors can take advantage of the newly accessible tools and then share them. And in terrorism, political developments do matter. For example, we've now greatly increased the incentives for Iranian-sponsored proxy actors like Hezbollah, maybe, to try this route. Plus, I believe that the foolish, counterproductive firing of so many highly trained American scientific researchers can only increase the likelihood of insider threats. Again, even if we're only talking about it on the margins. I work with scientists and engineers at Carnegie Mellon. That's what I do. I bring them in conversation with policymakers and tech companies and others so that the strategy between the two can be understood, so that the scientists and engineers can understand the downstream potential effects of what they're building, what they're developing, and how they can build them differently or slightly alter the various things they're working on. That's the whole reason I went to Carnegie Mellon. Frankly, I had a great job in Washington, and I love Pittsburgh, but it was a conscious decision to try to understand what is happening at the cutting edge of technology, because I knew that I didn't fully understand it. Anyway, here are 3 things that could help to prevent bioterrorism today. First, erect stronger barriers to entry for unknown customers of remote labs. I don't believe that those who use remote labs should remain anonymous. Second, change the frontier models, do more red teaming, decrease the potential for jailbreaking, and reduce the likelihood of building dangerous new agents using Gen AI. And finally, legislate serious human oversight of remote robotic labs. Right now, the commercial incentive is all about having low-level, minimally trained help on site. And think about how illogical that is. It may be financially beneficial for a private company. There's risk there. It's very unwise. And now finally, just a few words about the evolving role of technology in counterterrorism. So we've talked about downstream, upstream, and now on counterterrorism, because terrorism and counterterrorism are in conversation with each other. It's not that counterterrorism tools are unrelated to what happens in the terrorism world. AI dramatically improves pattern recognition, threat detection, and analytical speed. But in pursuit of speed, sometimes faulty prediction and the issue of state legitimacy gets short shrift. Yet, whether future terrorism is manageable depends very heavily on how wisely we build counterterrorism technology. Here are two big challenges that I'll mention. The future is on human-machine teaming. Finding the right balance between human and machine roles in intelligence analysis is very difficult. Terrorism is a human phenomenon that deliberately tries to reach an audience. When a threat is clearly imminent, rapid kinetic responses are appropriate. But in the long run, counterterrorism is not only a game of targeted killings, special operations, military and police responses, and particularly military responses as it became after 9/11. It's also a key test of a government's ability to retain support on the status quo side, as it undermines support on the terrorist group side. Remember, terrorism is always to some degree oriented toward an audience, and that audience can be on the status quo side as well as on the side of the group or individual. Machine learning and generative AI have been game-changing tools to integrate vast amounts of sensor, imagery, signals, open source, and human intelligence. That's invaluable. It's an enormous advance. According to open sources, the CIA is integrating artificial intelligence-powered co-workers into an analyst's workflows. It's using Gen AI to collect intel on terrorist content across the internet. And reportedly, the CIA will soon use AI agents in hybrid mode with humans, allowing them to generate reports and even use them to draft key judgments. But it doesn't matter how good your tech is if your algorithms have biases and your search parameters are politicized, like not including the serious problem of right-wing threats in the United States, for example. Human-machine teaming has well-known vulnerabilities. For example, automation bias often means that analysts come to depend too heavily on the AI technologies that they use. And the concept of human in the loop, I believe, is obsolete because modes of human computer interaction are reshaping counterterrorism responses. Going forward, I'm concerned that human cognition skills will degrade and counterterrorism analysts will lack the foundational knowledge base, imagination, intuition, and experience to ask the right questions, to recognize gaps, to catch mistakes. You know, remember after 9/11, you're probably too young to remember, but in any case, after 9/11, when we had the 9/11 report, there was a lot of talk about connecting the dots and the fact that different parts of the counterterrorism enterprise in the United States were not talking to each other, FBI, CIA, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, it wasn't just connecting the dots and it wasn't just bureaucratic. It was a lack of imagination. It was a failure of training and thinking. That's what I'm afraid of today. We can be as integrated as we want across organizations and across platforms, and that is fabulous. But if we at the same time allow humans to lose their cognitive advantage and their basis in understanding terrorism and the threats and doing the old-fashioned training of their minds, you're going to have failure. The second thing that I'll mention is a few words about surveillance, the other big area that I'm concerned about in counterterrorism, finding the right balance in data collection on domestic populations. In the United States, the intelligence community purchases data from commercial companies and treats it as, quote, publicly accessible information, end quote. That provides crucial open source intelligence. It also arguably eludes the Constitution's Fourth Amendment, search and seizure prohibition on warrantless domestic data collection by the government. Forgive me for all the American examples, but you know, I do live in the United States. There's also automated data aggregation, AI-driven facial recognition, biometrics and predictive analytics by private firms who sell the information to organizations like the Department of Homeland Security. Of course, commercially accessible information offers benefits to nefarious actors too, both state and non-state actors, which is a serious liability. And so the argument, of course, is why should the organized parts of governments not have access and take advantage of the same sources? I understand that argument. But the answer is also to put privacy and protections in place, not just join the commercial data juggernaut. I'm not convinced that the United States has found the right balance in counterterrorism yet. In the absence of transparency about what commercial data our government buys and uses, the intelligence community undermines public trust, which is an important accelerator to alienation and increasing rates of anti-government terrorism that are currently underway. Undermining public trust does matter to terrorism. Counterterrorism is an enterprise that is completely infused with human values. It's not just a matter of how the tools are used, but also whether a technological capability strengthens or undermines the institutions of counterterrorism and how they're perceived. Even with powerful AI-driven technologies, those engaged in counterterrorism cannot ignore their responsibility to fight terrorism by strengthening the government's moral authority through transparency, privacy protection, and fairness. And that means defining terrorism as an act separate from the ideology, whether it's left-wing, right-wing, or essentially ideology-less, respecting civil liberties, following the rule of law, and being seen to do so. So let me quickly conclude. I started out by saying that counterterrorism as an institution is young. I think we're at a crossroads now in whether terrorism evolves into a much more dangerous threat via frontier technologies, and whether counterterrorism will be effective or will worsen the threat of terrorism. Technology will accelerate detection, radically magnify surveillance, and expand defensive and offensive counterterrorism options. It will also significantly lower barriers to malign action. But the defining choices will still be human. How companies govern, how states preserve legitimacy, and how analysts exercise judgment are all inherent human choices. And we're at a watershed moment in building wise policies, both in governments and in private companies. Terrorism is an inhumane act, but it is inherently human. Thank you.